2026 is going to be an awesome year. We got some pretty cool stuff coming up. First off, we got Foundations of Recovery. This is our flagship program. We're starting it in January.
This is for anyone, man, woman, or couple who wants to come and reclaim their heart from shame, trauma, and betrayal. We start off with an education on all sorts of principles, give you the common language. We feed you from a fire hose in terms of all things recovery.
It is such a great start to recovery. And we get at the roots of things, Tyler. This isn't like any other program. Like, this is our healing journey in process, and Foundations is where we begin.
If you look at the value that you're getting there to kick off a good recovery with all of the right education, all of the right language, and a team to get you started while also being directed by Brannon and myself through the whole process, what a deal.
So if you're interested, if you're struggling, if you've been wanting to do something for a long time, jump into this. This only comes around every so often, and we would love to have you there.
Click the link in the description to sign up for it. And to make it even sweeter, we're also including a raffle for a free pass to the Radiant Dawn retreat. Anyone who signs up for Foundations will be added to the raffle for that free Radiant Dawn pass. If you're a man and you sign up for Foundations, your name still gets entered, and you can give that pass away if you win it to any woman that you want to.
So what you're saying, Tyler, is if you sign up and participate in Foundations, you could possibly go to Radiant Dawn for free?
That's exactly what I'm saying, which is crazy because Foundations by itself is already an insane value.
Man, I sound so salesy. But it actually is awesome. So come to Foundations. And even if you don't come to Foundations, sign up for Radiant Dawn. It's beyond therapy, the best healing experiences that you can have.
Click the link below and come join us. Is this topic blasphemous? Welcome to the Real Talk Recovery Podcast with the Therapy Brothers.
We're brothers, we're therapists, and we know recovery.
Bring your stories, your questions, your successes with real recovery.
Oh, I can't wait.
Oh, Brannon, you're chomping in the bit already.
Hey, I like juicy topics that are important, that are hard for people to hear. So,
yeah, well, it'll be an interesting discussion. I'm sure it'll probably get a lot of people thinking and maybe get a little bit of response from some of those people listening to today.
Hey, before we go into it, I'd like to give a little shout out to one of our super fans, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
So I found out last week that one of our super fans is Aunt Gail.
Aunt Gail, holy cow. We didn't know that you loved our show so much.
One of the best people in the world. So Aunt Gail, shout out to you.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thanks for supporting us.
Yeah, I appreciate it. So Aunt Gail's always been just great. I love hanging out with her. She's fun. She's
great sense of humor.
Yeah.
I don't think I've laughed harder than watching her laugh sometimes.
Yeah. So thanks for listening, Aunt Gail.
Yeah.
Now on to our juicy topic.
Okay, Brannon. Okay. Why don't you introduce it?
Well, this is how I'll introduce it. So I'm trying to dial in my Instagram, if you want to follow me, it's Brannon_Patrick on Instagram. And if you go over to my Instagram, you can see a clear shift in direction a little bit from the old betrayal trauma stuff. And just like giving content about trust, betrayal, trauma, boundaries, things like that, which is good content. But I've shifted and I've started talking more about self-acceptance and sexuality. And I did this post last week where I was just asking the question if Christ was a sexual being, and if Christ was attracted to women, would he notice women in that way? Was Christ a sexual being? And I lost followers.
Yeah. Well, so now you're coming here to try to get us to lose followers too.
Yeah, exactly. No, but it's fascinating to me. So first off, I want to explain myself as to why I'm even making posts like that. Secondly, I'd really like to dissect why do people have a hard time hearing it, and why can they not tolerate that? And I also want to talk about why it's so important to actually talk about it.
And then maybe we can actually speculate a little bit with our own thoughts and opinions as to what the answer is to that question.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I'd love to do that as well.
Yeah.
But let's start with Tyler. Jesus or just God, is God a sexual being? Why is that an important discussion to have?
Yeah, well, why don't you go back and start, Brannon, with what you said, the reason why you're asking the question in the first place.
Because, there's some history to this, that if you really back it up and look at it from a cultural standpoint, and when I say cultural, just from people who are very religious, okay? I'm not talking specific religions, but just a rigid cultural thing. So, Tyler, you and I have treated sex addiction for a long time.
Long time.
Who knows how long now? And we've treated sex addiction in a very religious culture. And one of them, we just did an episode with an 18-year-old who's in the throes of the whole system of sexual shame, secrecy, and addiction, right? And what I've experienced and seen, and one of the missing pieces that I see, is that from a very, very young age, from the way that your parents teach you about sex to what you learn at religion to what a very, very young age, sexuality is synonymous with sin.
That's right.
And because of that, if sexuality is synonymous with sin, that means if you're sexual, then you are bad. And right there is the shame system that starts to actually create the real addictions. So the problem is not the sexuality, the problem is the shame. And so to ask the question, is Jesus sexual or is God a sexual being? It kind of undoes that whole thinking of sexuality equals sin.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes a ton of sense. I'm thinking as you were talking, just another little story. I remember this was several years ago, probably 10 or 15 years ago. I was asked to go to a church and give a lesson on how to teach your children about sexuality and the law of chastity. And I taught this lesson, and right towards the very end, there was a couple of people, older people, that raised their hands and said comments like, "I can't believe I just came to church today. I did not feel the Holy Ghost at all today. Like what you're saying inside a church building is totally blasphemous." And
what were some things that you were saying?
Those were the things that I basically just said, that we needed to teach our kids to speak in anatomically correct terms, and that we needed to teach them that their bodies were sexual as much as physical.
Did you say penis in church?
And I used the word penis in church.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
You didn't get hit by lightning.
I did all of that stuff. And it was really interesting because I think it was getting to the point that you're bringing it up. Unfortunately, the leader of the congregation that I was teaching at the very end got up and said, "Hey, I know that this is an uncomfortable topic, and I know a lot of you are having a lot of really strong feelings right now. I just want you to know that I think Christianity would fully endorse what was taught today. And if you have a problem with this, you have a problem with your own sexuality." And
good for him.
And that was, yeah. And I thought that was, I don't often hear that, but really that's what it's getting at, is if we look at it from a place of true Christian values, this is where it gets really muddy sometimes, because you track it all the way back to Adam and Eve. It's like they were put in the garden with 2 commandments: multiply and replenish the earth, and don't eat that fruit. But they were innocent and ignorant, and they didn't know. But sexuality was around basically from the beginning, and it was ordained of God in a certain circumstance. And that's why in Christianity, we have something called the law of chastity, which is to maintain our sexuality inside the bounds of a marriage. Right?
Under Adam's fig leaf, did he have an erection?
Probably from time to time, because the human body has to have an erection every so many hours.
Was that a problem? Was that a sin?
No, it wasn't. But Adam in the garden likely didn't even know it was not a sin or a sin because he was still ignorant until after he partook of the fruit, right? So now we're digging way into Christianity stuff here for a second, but that's the idea is that we as human beings, and I think most Christian religions would acknowledge this, we are sexual as much as we are physical and spiritual and everything else. And there's a lot of power in that sexuality. And doctrinally speaking, that's why the law of chastity is there. But the law of chastity doesn't say kill your sexuality and you're bad if you use it. It just says use it with certain bounds because of the power that it possesses.
So there's some just insinuation of things that really are damaging. So things like let me give you an example. I know a guy who tried to murder his wife, and he didn't like pull it off. He stole. He did horrible stuff, and the church came along, slapped him on the hand, and said, "Hey, stop that! Don't do that." I'm working with a 19-year-old boy who, actually, I take that back. I'm working with a 25-year-old man who can't stop masturbating and gets disfellowship from the church because he can't stop masturbating. Sexuality, sexual sin is right up there with murder, right next. It is the big daddy. Like it's the thing that is looked at as like, oh my gosh, did they do something sexual? Because if it's a sexual thing, it's 10 times worse. Mm-hmm. And I hate to say this, but Christ is depicted as non-sexual in every way at church. And leaders at church, the church leaders very much do not talk about or openly discuss sexuality. So they come across as very non-sexual. And so then these 14-year-old boys and girls, 14-year-old boys and girls who have sexuality just forming inside of them are comparing what they're feeling inside to what they're being taught on the outside. And it just starts to create all kinds of confusion and problems. And Tyler, the statistics show, and I don't know how they got these statistics, but that sex addiction is more prevalent in higher structure religious cultures than not. Mm-hmm. And there's a reason for that.
And I don't think it has to do with the doctrine so much as the culture that's come as a result of misinterpretation of the doctrine, though. Like culturally speaking, we grew up in a way where the way to try to protect a kid was to say, don't do X, Y, or Z. Don't do drugs. Don't look at porn. It'll ruin your life, and all of that stuff.
Don't.
Yeah. And so what the messaging was, without really actually saying the messaging was, if you do those things, you're bad. But that's not necessarily doctrine inside of Christianity.
But Tyler, and what you just said is important. Sex and drugs is very different in that scenario. Very, very different. Because what's the difference between sex and drugs?
What do you mean? I don't know.
Well, you can go to somebody and say, don't do drugs. Don't.
Oh, yeah.
You can go to somebody and say, don't be sexual.
Right.
And what's the problem with that?
That's the challenge is that then you're denying an innate part of yourself that I believe was actually given to you by God.
A godly,
it's an actually godly part of ourselves. And so, but that's the messaging that sometimes has been blatant and other times has been insinuated because of an effort to try to protect, that has said you're bad if. And that's the part that I think that's why you bring up this question, and it like kind of rocks people's worlds and like shakes them. And it's like, well, was Jesus sexual? I happen to believe myself, and everyone can come to their own conclusions on this with their own belief systems, but I happen to believe that Christ had to be sexual because he had to experience everything that humanity had to offer. And so he had to have those feelings and drives in order to fully comprehend and perform what he was sent to do, which was provide the atonement for us. And so it would make sense. It would only make sense that if that's part of the human condition, that Christ would also have experienced that part of the human condition.
It's Tyler, it's this, he had to be sexual to experience the human condition. I'd take it a step further than that. In that, I think on our one-dimensional view of things, we look at sex and sexuality as like temptation. It's
base and human.
It's the natural man. It's temptation. It's the thing I have to overcome while I'm in this existence, blah, 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 right? Now, if we shift paradigm a little bit, and this is just kind of my beliefs here, to sexuality is so godly and so amazing and so beautiful and so good that Christ had to be a sexual being because, what's more godly than the creative power that's there, right?
Yeah, right.
And so it's an amazing thing. And we all have that inside of us, and it's just incredible, right? And so you have to remove all these constructs of shame and, I'm bad and perverted and wrong in order to say, my sexuality is actually so important and so beautiful and so of God. And the fear is if I do that, then what's going to happen? If I fully accept my sexuality and just see it as godly, what's going to happen?
It boils down to really what it boils down to is a lack of trust in myself.
Yes.
Then I'm going to go off the deep end and I'm going to go misuse those powers and cause myself and my family all sorts of problems and end up with diseases and all that stuff. And it's like, actually, if we had a real accurate idea of ourselves as sexual beings as it relates to the expectations that God has set forth, and we trusted ourselves, then we could have a full expression of that sexuality in a godly way that would allow for that full participation in all of the beautiful things that you just described, which is not just the creative power, even though that in and of itself is so beautiful, and the symbolism of being able to, in a certain sense, emulate God in that way through that creative power, but also to take full advantage of the real power of emotional, spiritual connection.
Intimate connection. It's about love.
True intimacy when it's done with the right sort of...
There's a reason why it's called making love.
Yeah, right.
Tyler, I want to talk to you about good girl syndrome and sex addiction. Because in my mind, when you look at it, like, how does good girl syndrome come to be? And then
you might need to explain good girl syndrome, Brannon, really quickly.
Yeah. So, in sex addiction, because I'll explain it in just a second. It's the two sides of the pendulum of, so when we have this sexual self-rejection going on, then you're going to binge and purge. And that's like the sexual addiction where it's like, I'm just going to release and go. Where the good girl syndrome is kind of like the deprivation thing, where what good girl syndrome is as a woman, I was raised that sex is weird, bad,
dirty,
awkward, dirty. And, for a woman to really enjoy sexual pleasure, it's all about letting go and letting themselves really, really experience it. And so good girl syndrome comes along and says, you better not. That's disgusting. That's bad. You felt too much pleasure. You shouldn't. You're going too far. And so in the bedroom, they're very guarded, disconnected in many ways, shame-based, and struggle to orgasm in many ways because that good girl thinking is there. And it's interesting to listen to what that's called. Good girl syndrome. It's good for me to be non-sexual.
Yeah. That's right? The connotation. That's the connotation that's been sort of planted and taught over several years of living inside of
it's
like a
righteous
Christian religion. Sure.
Being non-sexual is righteous, and I get back to heaven by being non-sexual. That belief is so destructive to an individual. And so sex addiction, Tyler, we've seen this. We were just talking to this young man about it. I try to force myself to be as righteous as I can be.
righteous, in quotes.
Quote, I pray, I read my scriptures, I do everything I can to not have sexual fantasies, to not masturbate or look at porn or do whatever, right? Like just try not to be sexual. And then eventually in a moment of boredom or stress or whatever, what happens? It all spills out.
The release happens. The release it's like trying to bottle up a gas in a can, but it's trying to find its way out, and eventually it's
combustible.
Like, boom, and then it does come out in ways that cause us a lot of damage.
Exactly. Yeah. And then oftentimes they go to bishops and therapists that say, put that back in the can. Like, put it back in because that's bad. Look, see, it caused problems. There's your proof.
Yeah,
put it back in. And it's this cycle that goes on and on and on. And it just creates addiction. It creates shame. It creates disconnection from God, self, and others.
Yeah.
And I believe that anybody in a really religious culture and anybody struggling with good girl syndrome or sex addiction, one of the keys to it is to actually love your sexuality and who you are and actually see the goodness in your sexuality. And that will help you to not act out in a sex addiction or to not act out in other ways that are destructive to yourself.
Yeah, because now you're living from a place of understanding how it's a part of you, and then being willing to treat it with the respect that it deserves instead of hating it or hating self or feeling bad or feeling terrible. It's like, once I understand the actual real beautiful power of it, and I understand that when it's used and expressed with certain conditions, then I wouldn't want to mistreat it.
Yes, I have power. I can step into what it is.
Right.
But Tyler, you take a guy who's been rejecting himself as a sexual being for years, hiding it, just making sure nobody knows who he is as a sexual being, and he's betraying his spouse, and D-Day happens and it all blows up, and he gets into a program that says, hey, one of the important pieces of recovery here for you is for you to have compassion for who you are and accept your sexuality and be okay with your sexuality. What does that oftentimes do to her?
Oh, that feels so scary, and it feels so invalidating because it seems that the sexual being part of who he is what's caused all the problems.
Yeah.
And in reality, it's connected to that, but it's actually the self-rejection of that sexual being that's caused all the problems. It's not the being a sexual being that's a problem. It's the mistreatment of being a sexual being that's the problem.
Yeah. See how you're like, as Tyler's trying to describe that, it's like a knot that we're trying to untie that's hard to untie. Yet I think it's one of the most important knots to untie for real recovery to actually happen, Tyler. And you and I both know as therapists that we could just stay on the level of, hey, like, don't touch yourself. And we could just stay there. But unless we go address that deep shame, that deep sexual shame, and that relationship that somebody has with God around that sexual shame, we're not going to get to real recovery.
Yeah. And imagine being able in a Christian system, imagine how difficult it is if I've been doing things that I think are terrible to have to go and reconcile with God when I believe that God hates my sexuality.
Yeah.
Like, why would I ever want to go do that? And so that's why this question that you asked at the beginning is a good question to say, you know what, maybe I need to rethink actually my relationship with God and maybe ask some real questions, which is very, very scary for most people as to what is my relationship with God and what is the true nature of God for me.
Right.
And that's hard, scary, foreign terrain to step into. But if I was struggling with my sex addiction, which I saw God in a certain way for so many years, I saw God as punitive and punishing and upset with me. And I was trying to perform my way into being good enough for him to love me again. And the time when I felt God's deepest love for me was in the time when I deserved it the least. And just fractured my whole idea of God.
In your mind deserved it the least.
In my mind, like it was literally the day after my wife had left me after D-Day, and I'm laying on the front room floor of my house going like, I've just ruined everybody's life, including my own. I'm unworthy. I'm worthless. I'm unlovable. I'm crying out to God, like in sobs, like I don't know where else to turn. And my whole being is completely filled with love. And this little thought in the back of my mind, that's like, you're my son. It's okay. You're my son. And from that fractured my whole template of who God was. Like, how could God be giving me this experience in the moment when I have just gone and ruined everything?
Right.
And it's because I had a misunderstanding in my mind of who God actually was.
Right.
God was there loving me all along, and I was actually rejecting God with my self-judgment about how terrible I was.
Right.
And
yes.
And again, this is my personal experience and my beliefs. Everybody else is going to have their own. But I think it's at least okay to ask those questions and say, man, how am I ever going to reconcile myself to God if God is a person who hates my sexuality, even though he gave it to me?
Right. Yes.
Right.
Yes. You know, I was talking, I mean, we just recorded this other episode, and it's so pertinent to this conversation, Tyler, but I was talking to that young man about his narratives being created. And at such a young age, he's looking at himself as broken, as perverted, as unworthy of love, at a really young age. And so then he gets further along in life, and he starts to just see through this lens of that's who I am, and that's who he becomes.
Yes.
And that's the problem. That's
and he'll become a lifelong church-going Christian who is not engaged with his heart, who's not connected to his
trying
life,
to be good enough,
who's afraid of God his whole life, and then he'll wonder why he hates going to church every week.
With no masculinity and consuming his wife for his self-worth.
That's right.
Right?
That's
and
right.
he'll wonder why he hates going to church every week, because God represents shame to him.
Yes, exactly.
Yes.
Instead of the truth, which we can look at almost any Bible verse and say, God is what?
Love.
God is love.
Yes.
God is love. He's not shame.
Tyler, I woke up, I think I was in 8th grade or something. And I'm sure I woke up with like morning wood, you know. I was in 8th grade, like
every day.
Yeah, like every day for like 2 years. And I go to first period, and I remember pretty like right around that time, 12, 13 years old, I go to first period, and this girl walks in, and she, you know, it's the morning. So she had just taken a shower, and she was just like fresh, like, and she walks past me, and I could smell her, and she smelled so good, and she was so beautiful. And it was just like, and like, it was so inside of me of like, oh my gosh, like she is amazing. Right. And it was sexual attraction. I had a crush. There was other stuff going on as well. But I remember the next week going to church and being taught that you shouldn't have any sexual thoughts. And it kind of was like, and I'm grateful for mom and dad, because mom and dad kind of had a different attitude around it that I could sense that, hey, like things are okay. You're okay as you are when it comes to your sexuality. But I remember thinking like, how do I mix those two? Like, am I bad? Am I bad, Tyler? Is that 13-year-old?
No, you probably
who woke up with morning wood.
You didn't even realize the true extent of what sexual thoughts and feelings were probably at that age anyway.
But is it okay?
Yeah, it was it was totally fine. It was normal.
It's good.
Right.
Yeah, I didn't like go try to stalk her or masturbate to her or anything like that, right?
Yeah.
Like
you're a 12-year-old kid.
And my hormones were starting to kick in.
Yeah.
But the reason I bring up this story, Tyler, is it starts to create what you were just talking about with God. Is if I have a God where love is contingent upon my righteousness, and I have sexuality inside of me, and I have just strong messages of sexuality is bad, it's wrong, it's not okay, then that is a recipe for a real deficiency when it comes to my worthiness and my ability to accept God's love into my life.
Yeah. Well, and it becomes a recipe to then fuel all the negative traits and behaviors of secrecy, hiding, isolation, depression, because now I feel like I'm trying to fight the tide of the ocean. It's like,
Yeah.
there's no way. Have you ever tried to swim against a rip current? You're not going to win.
No, you're going to
Right.
drown.
Yeah, unless you learn, and this, how do you deal with a rip current? You acknowledge that the rip current is there, and then you swim perpendicular
Sideways,
to it
yeah.
until you can get yourself to a place of safety. And so, accepting that current is there, and then learning how to manage that. And I think that's where, Brannon, you go to church, in your story, I imagine that the people teaching you in church weren't thinking like, "Man, we got to make sure he hates sex and that he thinks he's bad." They were thinking, "We got to figure out how to help him be pure and chaste and know how to live a good life." And they were teaching you maybe a true principle, which is, you know what, you need to learn how to manage your sexual feelings. But they didn't teach the other part, which
that's the only side that's taught at church.
That's the challenge. Yeah. If it was met with the other side, if it's the dialectic of the both and, this is an amazing, powerful, normal experience that God has planted inside of you. And it's so good and powerful that he's asked for it to be treated in certain ways
with respect
and with boundaries. Now you've got some healthy sexuality going. But when only one side or the other is taught, then it causes a lot of problems.
When it's just heavy on the don't, then it creates that shame system that can really cause problems and start to disconnect.
Yeah. Well, and vice versa. If it's really heavy on the do and whatever, then it ends up blowing your life up in different
structure.
ways. And you don't have the structure, and you don't get the full benefits that come by having both and.
Right. But I think what's really important, Tyler, to look at here is people's hearts. So like, I've never been able to start a women's sexual addiction group because women have too much shame to actually come talk openly about. So I haven't got enough numbers of people to actually start that, because women just deep down are just full of shame when it comes to their sexuality and their righteousness and things like that. And I guess, what am I trying to say, Tyler? I think enough is enough when it comes to trying to use shame and fear to control us to be good. That's backwards. I believe that's actually Satan winning, not God winning by using that shame and fear to be good enough. Right?
Shame and fear is a short-term motivator that, if it's expected to be a long-term fuel source, will destroy you. And I do believe it's the adversary's. I actually personally believe that shame is the adversary's greatest tool. Out of everything else he can do, shame is his biggest tool. And we readily accept a life of shame, thinking that it's good religion.
At church and home, they teach shame.
Then shame is not the answer.
No.
And not long term, but short term it works.
Yeah, I was at church the other day, and I hate to say this, but I heard these words: God's love is not conditional. No, God's love is conditional, is what I heard. God's love it's conditional upon your righteousness. And I about threw up and yelled at the guy talking. Because what that says is, if you show up as non-sexual as Jesus is, and as perfect as he is, then you'll be loved. And we know that's not true. Just like your story earlier, Tyler.
Yeah.
So,
yep.
Yeah.
Interesting topic, Brannon.
Yeah. We might lose some listeners with this one, but if we didn't lose, you share this one with your friends.
Yeah, no, honestly, I think this is a really hard topic to tackle, and maybe we're doing it in a little bit of kind of people might call it a blasphemous way, but principally speaking, I do think there are some real questions that this kind of a discussion allows us to ask ourselves that are vital and important things to ask.
Tyler, just the fact that we can't say sex and God in the same sentence and think that, hey, that could be blasphemous. There's a problem with that.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So if you've made it to the end of the episode here, and you like what we have to say, send us some feedback. If you didn't like what we have to say, send us some feedback.
I love it.
Either way, we can have a good open discussion about things that often aren't allowed to be talked about.
Yeah. Awesome, Tyler. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Brannon.
All right. I'll talk to you later. We'll see you.